Welcome to Scale Modeling Videos. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to prepare an aircraft model body for paint. I'm going to be doing this by firstly sanding the glued parts of the aircraft, filling those parts in, rescribing any lost detail, priming the aircraft, then resanding any further parts that require sanding, and then conducting a final reprime of the aircraft. Now I have already assembled the aircraft model here. This is a 1x48 Airfix P40B Warhawk. I have done a review of this kit. To have a look at the review, please have a look at the link in the corner. Okay. Now, as you can see, I've already assembled the model here. To see how I assemble the model, please have a look at my build video on this aircraft, which I'll release in the next 2 weeks. Now, this video is broken up into 7 parts or chapters. If you look at the YouTube bar down the bottom, you'll see that it's been broken up into 7 chapters, okay? The first chapter being the intro, the second chapter being sanding of the aircraft, the third chapter being filling of gaps, the fourth chapter being rescribing, the fifth chapter being priming, the sixth chapter being resanding after priming, fixing any mistakes, and the last chapter being the final priming of the aircraft, okay? Now this video is a lot longer than my normal how-to videos. The reason for that being there is a lot to cover, okay? I have pretty much shrunk all my footage down to about 30 minutes, but in reality, this process took close to about anywhere between 4 to 5 hours of work, okay? And I've dwindled that down to about 30 minutes of footage for you guys. I wanted to be in-depth as much as possible so that, you guys get the most benefit out of this. Righto. Like I said, I've got chapters down below, so if you're not interested in a part or you think you already know how to do a certain part, skip forward, okay? Here I'm using 400 grit sandpaper, okay? Here I'm using a round nail file. This is Tamiya's round nail file to sand out the little hole here. This white sanding stick is a 250 grit sanding stick. An important area to sand on an aircraft are the wings, okay? Usually you have seam lines on the edges of the wings, and these need to be sanded off, okay? This is very important on any aircraft build. Right, so that's what I'll be doing here. I'm going to sand the front, the back, sides of all the wings, okay? Next I'm going to polish the areas which I have just sanded. I am using a polishing stick from a company called U-Star. The polishing is now complete, and we will now go on to the filling stage. Next I will fill the gaps between the fuselage using Tamiya Basic Putty, the gray one. I like to mask off the gaps. This technique doesn't always work, especially if you leave a very small gap between the masking tapes like I've done here, and you'll see that because I've left such a small gap, when I pull the masking tape off, the putty will come off with it. The advantage of this method is that you protect all the details by covering them with masking tape. Here I am applying Tamiya's basic putty. Now this is a really good putty for filling in gaps between fuselages, as it dries to a very hard finish and it's easy to sand off. Now for the gaps in the aircraft that look like holes, like these ones I'm pointing at with a toothpick, I prefer to use the Perfect Plastic Putty or Vallejo's plastic putty, okay? This works really well on gaps that resemble holes, and it also works well on the gaps between the wings. As once I apply it, I can clear off the excess using water, and it leaves the putty in the hole, okay? Here I'm applying the Perfect Plastic Putty to the gaps between the wings. Now, like I said earlier, this putty is really good for where you have holes in the model or where you have deep crevices like I have here. Now I've let the Perfect Plastic Putty dry for about 2 hours, and then I've come here with an earbud and some water. I carefully remove the excess putty using the earbud,
leaving only the putty in the crevices and in the holes. Now here I am removing the masking tape, and as you see, the putty comes off with the masking tape, okay? Now I've made a mistake here, a few mistakes. One, I've removed the masking tape too early, okay? I should have given this at least a day or two to dry. And two, I've left too small of a gap between the masking tape to apply the putty, okay? So I'm going to apply Tamiya's Basic Putty again here. Now I let the basic putty dry for at least 24 hours before I start sanding it again. Once again, I'm sanding it with a 200 grit sanding stick first before I move on. So this is a 200 sanding grit here before I move on to the other sanding sticks, and then I'll finally end up polishing it at the end. I have now removed most of the putty, and the model is now ready to be rescribed. So this is the next stage. Here we will rescribe the lost detail, okay? So here I'm using Tamiya's rescribing tool to rescribe some of the panel lines, okay? To rescribe the rivets, I like to use a pin vise, as you can see here. I just put it where the rivet was and screw it around to rescribe that rivet. Now, in order to rescribe panel lines on the fuselage, as it is a round shape, I use plastic tape. Now, you can buy this from general stores, and I apply the plastic tape where I want the panel line to be. Now, this gives me a hard edge against which I run a hobby knife with. Once I run the hobby knife, I then sometimes run a rescriber over it as well. As you see here. After I have rescribed most of the detail, I like to use a toothpick to remove the dust within the panel lines. Next, I will mask off the wheel wells. I like to use this using Clever Putty because Clever Putty molds to the shape of the part you put it in, as you can see here. Also, something I haven't shown here is that before we prime the model, I clean the model with a paper towel and some water, okay? I then let the model dry and give it another quick dust off before priming again, okay? The next step is priming. I'm going to let the primer dry now. Now with aircraft models, I like to dry the aircraft model by hanging it in the air as if it were in flight. Now I hang it via the stick that holds the aircraft model, and I put this stick under a large tin can. Here I'm using a large tin of lacquer thinner to hold the stick, and as you can see, the aircraft model now looks like it is in flight. This helps the primer dry evenly from top to bottom. Once the primer is dried, I can see that there's still a few places that need fixing up. So the seam at the very top still hasn't been filled in properly, so we're going to apply some putty there. Okay, there's still some gaps here as well. Okay, and on the bottom there's still a gap there, as you can see, and it looks like the primer didn't dry evenly on this part here as well. Okay, so we've got some sanding and filling to do. I'm going to mask off the areas I want to apply putty on, and then apply Tamiya's basic putty. Okay. I've let the putty dry for more than 24 hours, and now I'm going to sand it again. Okay, I will let the video explain the rest. After sanding and polishing the model a second time, I'm going to rescribe any lost detail again. Here I'm using my pin vise to rescribe any rivets. And in case you lose any panel lines, just rescribe them again, okay? Once again, I'm going to clean the model before I reprime it again. I'm going to prime the model again. Here is the model after the primer has dried for about 24 hours, okay? As you can see, I've filled in all the gaps and the panel lines have all been rescribed, and so have the rivets. Now, this was a long process and I hope I explained it clearly. So we first sanded the model, we then filled in the gaps, we then sanded down all the putty, we then rescribed it, we then primed it, we then fixed any mistakes again by filling them in. We then resanded, rescribed, and reprimed, and finally we got the final product here, which is now ready for painting, sorry.